Captain Alexander Reed, a man forged in the fires of countless battles, had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer. His name was whispered in the corridors of power, his feats recounted in hushed tones by those who knew the true cost of war. Reed wasn't just a soldier, he was a legend. His eyes, hardened by years of conflict, held the weight of the lives he'd taken and the men he'd lost. Yet, when the call came, when the mission to Zerath was put on the table, Reed didn't hesitate. The Galactic Council warned him of the dangers, the near certainty of death, but Reed saw something else, a challenge, a chance to face the unknown and perhaps find something within himself he hadn't yet discovered. The HFY were no ordinary enemy. They were a tribe of all-female warriors, feared across the galaxy not just for their unmatched strength and combat skills but for their terrifying ritualistic practices. To defeat a HFY in battle was to face a fate worse than death, for they believed consuming the flesh of their enemies granted them power, a belief that had turned them into something more than just warriors, something primal, unstoppable. The Galactic Council had wisely placed an embargo on Zerath, labeling the planet too dangerous for exploration or colonization. But the HFY's hunger for survival pushed them beyond their borders, threatening nearby star systems, leaving fear and chaos in their wake. Reed had heard the stories. He knew what awaited him on Zerath, an enemy that would not just seek to kill him but to consume him, body and soul. But what intrigued him more was the artifact that had been thrust into his hands by a dying alien during his last mission. The alien's last words haunted him, vague and cryptic. "This will be your shield, your sword, your curse." The artifact was unlike anything Reed had ever seen, small, unassuming, yet pulsating with a strange energy that seemed to resonate with his very being. What was its purpose? How could it possibly help him against the HFY? These questions gnawed at him, but Reed knew he wouldn't find the answers by staying behind. Zerath held the key, and Reed was determined to unlock its secrets. The journey to Zerath was uneventful, almost eerily so. The vast emptiness of space seemed to hold its breath as Reed's ship approached the planet's atmosphere. The moment he breached the planet's skies, the silence was shattered. His sensors went haywire, overwhelmed by the sheer intensity of life forms below. The HFY were waiting. Reed's landing was rough, his ship barely holding together as he wrestled it down through the thick, turbulent air. As the ground rushed up to meet him, Reed's mind was already racing, formulating plans, strategies, anything that could keep him alive long enough to understand what he was up against. Stepping out of the wreckage, Reed was greeted by a landscape as unforgiving as its inhabitants. The air was thick with the scent of blood and battle, the ground stained with the remnants of countless skirmishes. The HFY weren't just warriors. They were hunters, and Reed was in their territory now. It didn't take long for them to find him. They moved like shadows, silent, deadly, their eyes burning with a fierce intelligence. Reed barely had time to draw his weapon before the first attack came, a blur of motion and violence that would have overwhelmed any lesser man. But Reed was no ordinary man. The first HFY warrior to engage him was fast, faster than anything he'd faced before. She was on him in an instant, her blade flashing in the dim light. Reed parried, deflected, countered, his movements precise, calculated. But it was clear this was a test, a probing strike to assess his skill, his worth. As more warriors closed in, Reed knew he couldn't afford to engage them all directly. He needed time to think, time to plan. With a calculated burst of energy, he activated the artifact, a pulse of light radiating outwards, causing the HFY to hesitate, if only for a moment. It was enough. Reed used the brief lull to retreat, disappearing into the dense foliage, his mind racing with possibilities. As he moved deeper into the wilderness, Reed's thoughts turned to the HFY leadership. These weren't mindless brutes he was dealing with. They were disciplined, strategic, and if he was to survive, he would need to outthink them, outmaneuver them. But first, he needed to understand them. Reed's strategy was simple: survive, observe, and find a way to make contact with the HFY Queen. For it was clear that in this brutal, unforgiving world, only one voice mattered, and if Reed was to complete his mission, that was the voice he needed to hear. Reed moved through the dense terrain of Zerath with the precision and caution of a seasoned warrior. Every step was calculated, every sound scrutinized. He knew he was being watched, felt the eyes of the HFY on him, unseen but undeniably present. The land itself seemed to resist him, as though the planet had a will of its own, shaped by the relentless will of the HFY who called it home. The vegetation was thick and unyielding, the air heavy with humidity, making every breath a labor. But Reed pressed on, knowing that hesitation meant death in this unforgiving world. The deeper he ventured, the more he learned about the HFY. They were not mere savages, as some in the Galactic Council had believed. Their society was a complex web of rituals, honor, and unyielding loyalty to their queen. The HFY were united, driven by a singular purpose that Reed had yet to fully understand. Their culture was built around strength, both physical and mental, and their hierarchy was clear and rigid. At the top was the queen, a figure of immense power and authority, whose word was law. Below her were the elite warriors, each one a master of combat, honed by years of brutal training and real-world experience. Every aspect of their lives was a testament to their dedication to survival and dominance. Reed's first encounter with the HFY warrior was sudden and intense. She appeared from the shadows like a specter, her eyes cold and calculating. The tension was palpable, a silent standoff between two beings who both understood that the next move could mean life or death. Reed kept his hands visible, non-threatening, yet ready to strike if necessary. The warrior's gaze flicked to the artifact he carried, her expression momentarily softening with recognition before hardening again. It was clear that she was assessing him, measuring his worth as either a potential ally or a threat to be eliminated. Reed's instincts told him that any wrong move would be his last. Understanding the precariousness of his situation, Reed knew that communication was his only chance at survival. He began by holding up the artifact, its faint glow catching the warrior's eye. She tilted her head, a silent question in her expression. Slowly, Reed began to speak, using what little he knew of their language, interspersed with universal gestures of peace. The warrior didn't respond at first, her gaze never leaving his. But as he continued, her posture shifted, still wary, but less hostile. Reed could see the gears turning in her mind, a flicker of curiosity breaking through her stoic exterior. The breakthrough came when the warrior, after what felt like an eternity of tense silence, finally spoke. Her voice was low, measured, carrying the weight of authority. She questioned him, her tone demanding answers about his purpose, his intentions. Reed responded with honesty, explaining his mission, the warnings he had received, and the resolve that had brought him to Zerath. He told her of the artifact, hinting at its potential significance, though he himself was still uncertain of its true power. The warrior listened intently, her expression inscrutable, but there was a shift, a subtle yet undeniable shift in the air between them. She was intrigued, and in that intrigue, Reed saw a glimmer of hope. It was then that the warrior made a decision. With a gesture, she motioned for Reed to follow, leading him deeper into the heart of HFY territory. The journey was fraught with peril, every step taking them closer to the epicenter of the HFY's power. Along the way, Reed noticed the subtle signs of their society, symbols etched into the rocks, the disciplined formations of warriors training in the distance, the silent communication that passed between the HFY like an unspoken language. These were not the actions of a mindless horde. This was a civilization steeped in discipline, strategy, and a relentless will to survive. As they approached the central stronghold, Reed's mind raced. He was about to meet the Queen, the true power behind the HFY, and he knew that this encounter would determine not only his fate but potentially the fate of entire star systems. The warrior led him into a massive chamber, its walls adorned with intricate carvings that depicted the history and conquests of the HFY. At the far end of the chamber, seated on a throne of stone and bone, was the Queen. Her presence was overwhelming, her gaze piercing through Reed as though she could see into the very depths of his soul. The Queen wasted no time. She demanded to know why Reed had come, her voice echoing through the chamber with a mix of authority and suspicion. Reed held his ground, his voice steady as he explained his mission: to negotiate peace or, if necessary, eliminate the threat the HFY posed. The Queen listened, her expression unreadable, but there was a sharpness in her eyes that told Reed she was not easily swayed. Then, the Queen's gaze fell upon the artifact. A moment of recognition passed between them, and Reed realized that the Queen knew more about the artifact than she was letting on. She challenged him, testing his resolve, probing for weakness. It was a battle of wits, a delicate dance where one misstep could lead to disaster. Reed spoke of peace, of the potential for a future where the HFY could thrive without the need for endless war. But the Queen was not easily convinced. She questioned his motives, his understanding of the artifact, and what it truly meant for their people. In that moment, Reed understood the gravity of the situation. The artifact was not just a tool or a weapon, it was a symbol, a key to something much larger than he had anticipated. The Queen's knowledge of the artifact hinted at a deeper conflict, one that Reed was only beginning to grasp. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only his physical prowess but his ability to navigate the complex web of politics, survival, and power that defined the HFY. Reed knew that to succeed, he would need to prove his worth in ways he had never imagined, for the fate of entire worlds hung in the balance. Reed's bond with the HFY warrior deepened with every passing day. What had started as a tenuous alliance born out of necessity evolved into something more, a mutual respect, even a shared understanding of their respective worlds. The warrior, once distant and guarded, began to open up to Reed, revealing layers of the HFY culture that few outsiders had ever seen. She spoke of the pride they took in their strength, their history of survival against overwhelming odds, and the deep-rooted fear that now haunted them all. It was in one of these moments of vulnerability that the truth finally came to light. The HFY were not expanding their territory out of conquest or greed, but out of sheer desperation. They were being hunted, chased from their homeworlds by a parasitic species that fed on their kind. These parasites were relentless, adapting to every defense the HFY threw at them, consuming entire populations in their wake. The HFY, once proud and unyielding, were now running for their lives, their aggressive expansion nothing more than a last-ditch effort to find a safe haven. Reed listened, the weight of their plight settling heavily on his shoulders. The HFY were not the mindless marauders the galaxy believed them to be. They were refugees, driven to the brink of extinction by a force beyond their control. As Reed and his ally ventured deeper into the wilds of Zerath, they stumbled upon an ancient structure, half-buried and forgotten by time. The air around it thrummed with a familiar energy, the same energy that emanated from the artifact Reed carried. His ally paused, her eyes wide with recognition, as if she had seen this place before in the legends passed down through her people. Together, they approached the structure, the artifact in Reed's hand glowing brighter with each step. It was here, in the heart of this forgotten ruin, that the full truth of the artifact's power was revealed. The artifact was not merely a trinket or a relic. It was a key, designed to unlock a weapon of unimaginable power hidden deep within Zerath. This weapon, created by an ancient race long extinct, had the potential to either save the HFY from their parasitic pursuers, or doom them all. Reed felt the weight of this revelation crash down upon him. The decision that lay before him was almost too much to bear. On one hand, activating the weapon could wipe out the parasites and offer the HFY a chance at survival, perhaps even a future free from fear. On the other hand, there was no telling what the weapon might do to the planet itself, or to the HFY who remained. Reed's mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. His mission had been clear: to either broker peace or neutralize the threat. But this was something else entirely. The artifact in his hand pulsed with a life of its own, as if urging him toward a decision he wasn't ready to make. The stakes had never been higher, and the burden of responsibility felt like a crushing weight on his chest. Reed knew that whatever choice he made, it would reverberate far beyond the confines of Zerath, potentially altering the balance of power across the galaxy. The tension between Reed and the HFY Queen grew palpable. She was no fool. She sensed the turmoil within him, the doubt that clouded his usually clear judgment. Her suspicion, once dormant, began to surface. She questioned his every move, every word, probing for signs of weakness or betrayal. Reed could see the mistrust growing in her eyes, a flicker of doubt that threatened to undo everything he had worked for. He knew that revealing the full truth to her could either solidify their alliance or shatter it completely. The Queen's patience was wearing thin, and Reed could feel the noose tightening around his neck. The moral dilemma gnawed at him, relentless and unforgiving. Was it right to unleash a weapon of such power, knowing the potential consequences? Could he justify the risk, even if it meant saving an entire species from annihilation? Or would activating the weapon only lead to more death, more destruction, leaving Zerath a barren wasteland, with the HFY no better off than before? Reed's thoughts spiraled, each one pulling him deeper into a pit of uncertainty. The artifact, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a curse, its power a double-edged sword that could cut both ways. As he stood on the precipice of decision, Reed realized that there was no clear answer, no easy path forward. The choices before him were shrouded in shadows, each one fraught with peril. He knew he would have to make a choice soon, and whatever path he chose, there would be no turning back. The fate of the HFY, and perhaps the galaxy itself, rested in his hands, and Reed could only hope that, when the time came, he would find the strength to do what was right, whatever that might be. As Reed delved deeper into the ancient structure, he stumbled upon a hidden chamber, its walls lined with inscriptions and data terminals that had long been forgotten by time. The air was thick with the weight of history, and Reed's pulse quickened as he activated one of the terminals. What he uncovered was nothing short of horrifying, a record of human settlers from centuries ago, detailing experiments that had been kept secret from the rest of the galaxy. The settlers, driven by ambition and hubris, had attempted to create a slave race through genetic manipulation, a species that would serve them without question. But the experiment had gone horribly wrong. The records detailed the creation of the parasitic species that now hunted the HFY, a byproduct of humanity's reckless interference with the natural order. These creatures, once meant to be mere tools, had evolved into something far more dangerous, turning on their creators and spreading unchecked across the galaxy. The settlers, realizing the catastrophe they had unleashed, abandoned their projects and fled, leaving the parasites to ravage the worlds they had touched. Zerath had been one of those worlds, a planet once teeming with life, now scarred by the horrors of a forgotten past. Reed's stomach churned as the implications sank in. The HFY's suffering, their desperate flight from world to world, all of it could be traced back to humanity's dark history. The very species that had driven the HFY to the brink of extinction was one of humanity's making. The realization hit him like a blow. He was carrying the burden of his ancestors' sins, a legacy of destruction that had come full circle. The artifact, the key to an ancient weapon, was now tainted by the knowledge of what that weapon had been intended for, a final, desperate attempt to clean up the mess humanity had made. When Reed shared this revelation with his HFY ally, the reaction was immediate and visceral. She recoiled, her eyes filled with a mix of horror, betrayal, and rage. The trust they had built, fragile and hard-won, was shattered in an instant. She lashed out, accusing him of being no different from those who had come before, those who had wrought so much suffering upon her people. Reed could see the conflict tearing at her, the struggle between her loyalty to the HFY and the bond she had formed with him. It was a painful reminder that, despite his intentions, he was still an outsider, a representative of the very species that had brought so much pain to her people. The revelation of humanity's dark past put Reed in an impossible position. He had come to Zerath to negotiate peace, to find a way to stop the HFY's aggression and protect the galaxy from further conflict. But now, with the knowledge of what his ancestors had done, he faced a moral dilemma that threatened to tear him apart. Should he reveal the truth to the HFY Queen, risking the fragile alliance, and possibly igniting a new wave of hatred and violence? Or should he keep the knowledge to himself, use the weapon to destroy the parasites, and hope that the HFY would never discover the truth? The stakes had never been higher. The potential consequences of using the ancient weapon loomed large in Reed's mind. It could save the HFY, wipe out the parasitic species once and for all, but at what cost? The weapon's power was immense, its effects unpredictable. What if it did more than just destroy the parasites? What if it unleashed something even worse, something that could threaten not just the HFY but the entire galaxy? Reed's thoughts spiraled as he grappled with the weight of his decisions. He could feel the Queen's gaze on him, her patience wearing thin as she awaited his next move. The tension between them was palpable, a silent battle of wills that mirrored the internal conflict raging within Reed. He knew that whatever choice he made, there would be no turning back. The truth of humanity's past had come to light, and with it, the realization that sometimes the greatest threats are not the enemies we face, but the darkness within ourselves. Reed stood at a crossroads, his next decision poised to define the fate of not just the HFY, but perhaps the entire galaxy. Reed knew the moment of truth had arrived. He could no longer keep the dark secret hidden, no matter the consequences. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on him, but he understood that the only way to forge a true path forward was to reveal the full extent of humanity's involvement in the creation of the parasitic species. With a steady voice, he laid everything bare before the HFY Queen, recounting the terrible history he had uncovered. The words hung in the air, thick with the gravity of their meaning. As he finished, the silence that followed was deafening. The Queen's reaction was immediate and explosive. Fury erupted in her eyes, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal. To hear that the very species responsible for their suffering had sent one of their own as a so-called ally was almost too much to bear. She condemned Reed with a voice that echoed through the chamber, her accusations cutting deep. The trust that had been tenuously built between them shattered in an instant, replaced by a seething rage that threatened to consume them all. But just as the situation seemed beyond repair, Reed's HFY ally stepped forward. She spoke with passion, her voice a plea for reason in the midst of chaos. She reminded the Queen of the true enemy, the parasites that had driven them from their homeworlds and slaughtered their people. She urged the Queen to see beyond the past, to recognize that Reed's intentions, despite the sins of his ancestors, were genuine. The survival of their species depended on unity, not further division. Her words struck a chord, and though the Queen's anger did not dissipate, it was tempered by the urgency of the threat they still faced. With the Queen's reluctant consent, the focus shifted to the impending battle. The parasites were closing in, their numbers overwhelming, their intent clear. The only hope lay in activating the ancient weapon, a task that now seemed both a race against time and a desperate gamble. Reed and his ally moved with purpose, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. As they reached the weapon's control center, the sounds of the approaching parasites grew louder, a cacophony of death that threatened to drown out their resolve. The battle that ensued was chaotic and brutal. The parasites swarmed the HFY defenders, their relentless assault pushing them to the brink. Reed fought with everything he had, his every action fueled by the knowledge that failure was not an option. His ally stood by his side, her strength and determination matching his own. Together they reached the control panel, the artifact glowing with an intensity that mirrored the desperation of the moment. With a final breath, Reed activated the weapon. The activation unleashed a power unlike anything they had ever seen. The weapon's energy surged through the ground, into the atmosphere, and beyond, targeting the parasites with deadly precision. The resulting explosion was both magnificent and terrifying, a force of nature that obliterated the enemy but left a trail of devastation in its wake. The ground shook, the sky lit up, and when the dust settled, the parasites were no more. The victory, though decisive, came at a tremendous cost. The landscape of Zerath was forever altered, scarred by the weapon's destructive power. In the aftermath, the HFY Queen, though still wary of Reed, acknowledged his bravery. The shared history between their peoples was now an undeniable truth, one that would need to be reckoned with in the future. But for the moment, there was a fragile peace, a hard-won understanding that they had faced a common enemy and survived. Reed felt the weight of the mission's success tempered by the losses they had endured and the knowledge of the destruction they had wrought. As Reed prepared to leave Zerath, his thoughts were heavy with reflection. He had come to the planet on a mission to stop a war, but he had discovered something far more complex. The mission had tested him in ways he had never imagined, forcing him to confront the darkest aspects of humanity's past and to make decisions that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The uneasy peace he had helped to achieve felt fragile, a reminder that the consequences of history cannot be easily erased. Returning to the Galactic Council, Reed carried with him not just the report of the mission's outcome, but the burden of the knowledge he had gained. He knew that the revelations from Zerath would have far-reaching implications, not just for the HFY, but for humanity as well. The past could not be undone, but perhaps, through understanding and cooperation, a different future could be forged. As he stepped into the council chambers, the weight of his experiences settled upon him, a constant reminder that some battles are fought not just on the field, but within the very soul.